right, let's dive in. We're tackling the open office today. You know those seas of desks that seem to be everywhere?
Yeah,
We've
exactly.
got research, we've got articles, and it turns out the whole story of the open office is, well, a lot more interesting than you might think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. We're gonna look at where it came from, what works, what doesn't work, and how the pandemic has kind of forced everybody to rethink the whole thing.
Totally. Okay, so to kick things off, rewind the clock with me. One of our sources traces the open office all the way back to, get this, the 1950s,
Really? Wow.
a suburb of Hamburg, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew? I mean,
Yeah,
that's going way back.
it is. And, if you think about, like, the 1950s, the whole social and political scene then, it actually makes sense. You had that post-war push to break down hierarchies, make workplaces more, well, more equal, and the open office, at least in theory, was supposed to be part of that.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, how the office itself is kind of a reflection of what's happening in the wider world. But here's the thing. All these years later, research is showing us that, well, that open offices maybe aren't the productivity miracle that people thought they'd be.
Right.
One study even found that a whopping 70 to 80% of European office workers, I mean, most of them, are in open plan layouts.
Yeah, that's a lot. And you know what, though? Study after study is showing that those types of layouts can be absolutely terrible if you're trying to concentrate, especially if you've got some kind of complex task you need to get done.
Makes sense.
You've got the distractions, you've got the noise, you've got the lack of privacy, and it all just adds up to this cognitive overload. Like, imagine if you're trying to, I don't know, write a strategic plan, something that needs real focus, and you've got somebody like right next to you just hammering away on their keyboard.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the ideal environment to get things done.
It's like trying to meditate at a rock concert.
Exactly.
So knowing what we know now about all the downsides, the question is, why did open offices even become so popular in the first place?
Well, I mean, the sources kind of point to a couple of big factors. One is definitely cost, right?
Yeah.
Open plans let companies just cram more people into less space.
Makes sense.
And then there was this idea, which, it sounds good on paper, of promoting collaboration and spontaneous interaction.
Oh, yeah, that whole thing.
But like we're seeing now, that pendulum might be swinging back in the other direction.
It does seem like that. It feels like the pandemic, the rise of remote work, it forced everyone to really stop and think about the office. All of a sudden, people were at home, they had quiet, they had focus, and those noisy open plans just lost some of their shine.
Yeah, totally. And the data actually backs that up. The Saville study, the one we're looking at here, it shows that European office occupancy right now is only at about 60%, which is a pretty big drop from the 70% average they had before the pandemic hit. So clearly, working from home made people rethink what they really want, what they actually need from a workspace.
That's a good point. So fewer people are going back to the office, and the ones who are, well, they're expecting something different. Makes you wonder if this is it. Is it the beginning of the end for the open office?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely feels like things are changing. This whole trend toward smaller, quieter work zones, that's interesting. Our sources highlight Denmark as a leader in this.
Yeah, the Danish companies are favoring open office zones with like just 6 to 8 workstations each.
That's it.
That's it. And it's not just some random design choice. They're doing it because they're becoming aware of all the downsides of those big, chaotic open plans. I mean, those are the ones that became so common everywhere. So I guess the question is, what can other companies learn from this Danish approach? Is this the future?
Yeah, right. What is the future? It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely points to more, more human-centered design when it comes to offices.
Absolutely. Okay, so maybe the open office isn't dead, but it's definitely it's evolving. Speaking of evolution, one of our sources talks about this idea of activity-based working, which seems like a pretty promising solution. Can you break that down for us?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Activity-based working, it's all about designing offices with a bunch of different zones, and each zone is kind of tailored to a specific task.
Okay.
So instead of one giant open space, you might have a zone with like soundproof pods for when you need to really focus.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
Right. And then maybe you have a space that's all set up for collaboration with like writable walls and furniture you can move around, perfect for, brainstorming sessions or team projects. And then you could even have a social zone with comfy chairs and, a coffee bar just for hanging out and chatting.
I like it. It's like choosing the right tool for the job, right? The right space for the task.
Exactly.
This raises a really interesting question. Instead of asking, is the open office dead?
Yeah,
Maybe we should be asking, what is the future of the office? Period.
right.
The way we work, it's clearly changing. What does that mean for the places where work actually happens?
It's a great question, and it's something we're gonna really unpack as we keep going.
It is interesting to think about how I guess how the purpose of the office itself is evolving. One of our sources uses this phrase. They say, outdated office is evolving, which
Mhm.
I really like. It seems like we're kind of moving away from that idea of the office as this place you have to be and towards something a little more, I don't know, intentional.
It's almost like the office is becoming less of a place, a noun and more of a verb, like to office. But what does that actually mean, right? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, exactly. Like what are the key ingredients for this evolved workspace? What makes an office worth actually going to when working from home is always an option?
hmm Well, from the research that we've got here, it looks like flexibility and choice are at the top of the list. Think modular furniture, think adaptable spaces, and definitely think technology that really lets people work together, whether they're in the office or working remotely.
So it's about making the environment more adaptable,
Yeah.
making it able to keep up with work itself because work is changing so fast these days. But this idea of adaptability, it goes beyond just the physical space, doesn't it? It affects how companies manage the space too.
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing a move toward more, I guess you could say, data-driven approaches to workspace management. So companies are using things like sensors and analytics to track how spaces are actually being used, and then they make adjustments based on that data.
It's like Moneyball for the office.
Yeah, kinda.
You're using data to get the most out of the office space, which, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
It does, and it can be really helpful, as companies are trying to figure out how much real estate they actually need, especially with all these hybrid work models popping up.
Yeah, speaking of hybrid work, that Seville's study that we keep coming back to, it found that office occupancy is way lower on Mondays and Fridays. What's that telling us? What does that mean for the future of the office?
Well, I think it lines up pretty well with how popular hybrid work models are becoming. People are choosing to work remotely on those days, maybe to focus or maybe just to have more control over their schedules.
So then the question becomes, like, how do companies actually adapt to that?
Right.
Do they need less space overall? And then how do they deal with desks when people are only coming in part-time?
Yeah, those are the million-dollar questions. We're seeing companies trying different things like hot desking, where nobody has an assigned desk,
Oh, yeah.
or they're setting up more flexible booking systems for meeting rooms and workspaces. It's definitely a challenge to figure out, but it also gives us a chance to rethink that, I guess, that traditional office setup.
It sounds like a whole new way of thinking about things for
Oh.
both companies and the people who work there.
It is. We need to move away from that, that old idea that the office is just where you go to sit at your desk for 8 hours. It's less about just being there and more about being there for a reason.
I really like that. It's about being intentional, about why you're there, what you're doing.
Exactly. And you know what? That intentionality can actually lead to people being more engaged, more productive. When they're in the office, there's a reason. They're there to collaborate, they're there to connect, they're there to get things done.
Just like a focused burst of energy instead of just a long, slow drain. This brings us to a really important part of all this, which is company culture. If people aren't all together every day, how do you build that sense of community, those shared values, that feeling of belonging?
Yeah, that is the challenge a lot of companies are facing right now. It really does come down to leadership, leaders who make communication a priority, leaders who are transparent. And then it takes the right technology, stuff that helps people connect, collaborate, even if they're not in the same room.
It's like you're trying to bridge that physical gap, but also build a culture at the same time in this new world of work.
Exactly. And you can't just assume that culture is going to happen on its own. It needs to be nurtured, in person and virtually.
Like tending a garden. You got to make sure the conditions are right.
Exactly. And never, never underestimate the power of shared experiences. Even little things like, regular team check-ins or virtual coffee breaks, those can go a long way.
Okay, and what about bigger, more I guess, more significant shared experiences? Like, what about team building activities or offsites or even just celebrating a win together?
Those are super important too. Those moments, whether they're happening in person or virtually, they help build bonds. They make people feel like they're part of something.
This all makes me think back to something we were talking about earlier, the idea that the office is becoming less of a place and more of an experience. It's not just where you go to work, it's where you connect with people, where you work together, where you build relationships.
Absolutely. The office of the future is about so much more than just the physical stuff, the desks and chairs. It's about creating an environment that makes people feel good, that helps them be creative, that helps them connect.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm kind of left with this question. Is it possible that this more distributed way of working where the office is more of like a destination instead of a daily grind could actually lead to a more connected society overall? I mean, could it?
Hmm. That is an interesting thought. I mean, just imagine a world where work is more woven into our communities, where we're not all, stuck in traffic going to these big office towers, where we have more time to spend in our neighborhoods.
That sounds almost too good to be true.
It might sound like a dream, but I do think it's a dream worth chasing. And some of these trends that we're seeing, like remote work and how offices are changing, it suggests that we're already moving in that direction.
I like that. It's not just about changing the office, it's about changing how we think about work, how we
Yeah.
connect with each other.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation about the future of work so interesting. We're not just, trying to solve problems, we're trying to think differently, to explore new ways of doing things, to make work better, make it more sustainable, make it more human.
It's a big challenge.
It is.
Well, on that inspiring note, why don't we take a quick break and then we'll come back and dive into some even more, I guess, radical ideas about what the office could be. All right, so we've talked about how the open office is, it's changing, how hybrid work is kind of shaking things up, and how the whole point of having an office is shifting. But I want to get a little radical here. One of our sources, they had this line about outdated offices evolving. But what if we completely reimagine the office? What if we just threw out the whole idea of like four walls and a roof?
Okay. I like where you're going with this. What if the office was more flexible, more integrated into like our lives, our
Yeah.
cities?
Yeah. Paint me a picture. What would that even look like?
Okay, so imagine co-working spaces, but they're popping up in all these unexpected places, like parks, libraries, maybe even those empty stores you see around.
Oh, interesting.
And picture offices that kind of blend in with neighborhoods. So you have these like vibrant mixed-use communities where work and life are more, I guess, more intertwined.
That's a pretty big change from those big office towers we see in every city.
It is. But it's starting to happen already. People want more flexible workspaces,
Mhm.
and cities are starting to adapt. And of course, technology is a huge part of making this happen.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we can basically work from anywhere now with laptops and, our phones and video calls and all that. But we can't forget about the human side of things, right? If we're not all showing up at the same office every day, how do we keep those social connections, those chance meetings that sometimes lead to like new ideas and innovation?
That's a really good point. We have to design these new, more spread out workspaces to be more than just, functional. They have to help build a sense of community.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we design spaces that encourage those random connections when work isn't tied to one specific spot?
We have to be intentional about it. We have to think about adding communal areas, shared spaces, maybe even co-working spaces that are specifically designed to like connect people who have similar interests or skills.
So it's about like recreating those water cooler moments, but in a new way.
Exactly. We have to find ways to make those unexpected interactions happen, the kind that can spark new ideas, collaborations, even friendships.
This makes me wonder, could this more distributed way of working actually make society as a whole more connected?
That's a fascinating thought. I mean, picture a world where work is more woven into the fabric of our communities, where we're not all spending hours commuting to those big, isolated office buildings, where we have more time to to be involved in our neighborhoods.
This is a nice thought.
It might sound like a dream, but I think it's a dream worth chasing. And the things we're seeing, how work is changing, how offices are changing, it suggests we're heading in that direction. The way we work is changing, and the way we design our cities, our communities, it has to change too.
It's not just about the office, it's about how we think about work and how we connect with each other.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole conversation about the future of work so exciting. We're not just, trying to solve problems. We're trying to think differently, to explore new ways of doing things, to make work better, more fulfilling, more sustainable, more human.
Well, that's a great note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, from, where the open office came from to like these really big ideas about the future of work.
And if you're listening and this has, sparked some new ideas for you about your own relationship with work, or if it's made you think about the possibilities of the office in a new way, then we've done our job.
Exactly. We always want to leave you with something to think about, something to ponder. So here's a question for you. If you could design your perfect workspace, what would it be like? Where would it be? Who would you share it with? Until next time, keep diving deep.